The jungle breathed around him. Thick, twisting vines coiled over ancient stones, their emerald tendrils pulsing with faint bioluminescence. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of alien flora, and every step through the undergrowth sent tiny creatures skittering away. Commander Elias Vance tightened his grip on the plasma cutter, eyes scanning the overgrown ruins ahead. His ship had crashed 3 days ago, and he was running out of time. The emergency beacon was fried, his rations were dwindling, and the unsettling feeling that he wasn't alone gnawed at his mind. Then he heard it. A sound, soft but unmistakable. Chains clinking. He froze, his heart thudding against his ribs. Slowly, he followed the sound, pushing past thick, waxy leaves until he reached a clearing. His breath caught. There, in the center of a crumbling stone platform, a figure knelt. A woman, or at least, something that resembled one. Her skin shimmered like polished obsidian, reflecting the faint glow of the strange plants around her. Silver-white hair cascaded down her back, tangled and streaked with dirt. But it was her eyes that held him still, pools of violet, glowing softly in the dim light. Heavy chains bound her wrists and ankles, glowing with a faint blue energy that seemed to pulse with every ragged breath she took. Elias knew he should walk away. This wasn't his problem. But something in the way she looked at him, silent, pleading, unafraid, made him take a step forward. "Who did this to you?" His voice was hoarse from days without water. She didn't answer. Instead, her gaze flickered to the device on his belt, the plasma cutter. Elias hesitated. Every survival instinct screamed at him to leave. This was an unknown world, with unknown rules. For all he knew, she was dangerous. And yet, with a quick motion, he activated the cutter. The blue energy shackles sparked and hissed before falling away, dissolving into nothing. The woman staggered forward, gasping. Then, without a word, she bolted into the jungle, vanishing into the darkness. Elias stood there, heart hammering, wondering if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Days passed. He struggled to find food, scavenging from strange plants that may or may not have been poisonous. The jungle was alive with noises, whispers, rustling leaves, distant howls. He could feel something watching him, but nothing ever emerged. Then, on the 5th night, she returned. But she was different. She no longer looked weak, no longer seemed lost. Instead, she glowed, literally. A soft golden light radiated from her skin, illuminating the trees around her. In her hands, she held a small vial, filled with a shimmering, silver liquid. She stepped forward and held it out to him. Elias stared at it. What is this?" Her voice, when it finally came, was soft and melodic. A gift. He hesitated before reaching for it, but before his fingers could close around the vial, she whispered, "But if you take it, you are bound." Bound. Elias swallowed. "Bound to what?" "To us," she said. "To me." He looked into her glowing violet eyes, and in that moment, he knew. This was no ordinary cure. This was a choice. One that would change everything. Elias felt the weight of her words pressing down on him like a physical force. He wanted to ask more, to demand an explanation, but something in the way she stood, the stillness of her body, the unwavering gaze, told him she wouldn't say anything else until he decided. He looked at the vial again. It shimmered, as if the liquid inside was alive, shifting and swirling in patterns beyond his understanding. A cure. A miracle. The one thing that could save his people. But at what cost? His fingers twitched. He had spent years making decisions under pressure, balancing the fine line between logic and instinct, and yet this moment felt different. He wasn't just choosing for himself. He was choosing for an entire colony of people waiting light years away, people who would die without hope if he returned empty-handed. His throat was dry when he finally spoke. "If I take this, what happens to me?" She tilted her head slightly. "You become one of us." His stomach clenched. "Define one of you." Her violet eyes flickered with something unreadable. "Not as you are now." His heartbeat pounded in his ears. His mind ran through possibilities. Genetic alteration, servitude, something worse. He thought of the chains that had bound her, The way she had fled without looking back. If she had been imprisoned, was her freedom truly her own? And yet, despite everything, he knew what he had to do. Slowly, deliberately, he extended his hand and took the vial. The moment his fingers closed around it, a pulse of warmth shot up his arm. His skin prickled, his vision swam. The jungle around him blurred, the air thickened, and a strange hum filled his ears, a deep, resonant vibration that he felt in his bones rather than heard. He gasped, stumbling backward. The woman remained still, watching him with neither satisfaction nor regret, only quiet acceptance. The warmth spread, coiling around his spine, threading into his thoughts. A rush of something foreign invaded his senses. Memories that weren't his, glimpses of towering cities bathed in golden light, beings with luminous skin moving through landscapes that shimmered like liquid glass. He saw wars fought without weapons, voices speaking in a language that carved itself into his mind. And then, he understood. Not words, not explanations, but an undeniable truth settling into the marrow of his bones. The vial had been a test, a key, an initiation. The liquid wasn't just medicine. It was knowledge, a link, a transformation already in motion. His breath came in ragged gulps as he turned to the woman. "What have you done to me?" "You chose," she said simply. "Now you will see." His vision blurred again, and the world tilted. The last thing he saw before darkness swallowed him was the woman's glowing form stepping closer, her hand reaching for his forehead. And then, everything disappeared. He awoke to silence. The jungle was gone. The damp, humid air had been replaced with something lighter, purer. He was lying on a surface that felt like warm stone. But when he looked, it had no texture, no color he could define. A vast expanse stretched before him, endless and shimmering, like standing at the edge of a dream. He pushed himself up, and only then did he notice his hands. They were changing. Golden veins pulsed beneath his skin, faint but unmistakable. His fingers tingled, his senses felt heightened. The distant hum from before was still there, but now it was inside him, a resonance he couldn't shake. He turned sharply, his heart pounding, and there she was again. But she was different now. The ethereal glow surrounding her was brighter, her form less human, more fluid. It was as if she existed on the edge of reality, shifting between presence and something beyond his understanding. "You are awake," she said. His voice was hoarse. "Where am I?" She gestured behind him, and he turned. What he saw stole his breath. A city, but not a city. It rose in the distance, a massive structure of cascading light and impossible geometry, shifting with every blink as though refusing to be defined. Beings moved within it, their forms similar to hers, tall, radiant, weightless. Some turned to look at him, their eyes filled with recognition, as if they had been waiting. Panic coiled in his chest. "You didn't say anything about this." She stepped closer, her violet eyes locking onto his. "Would it have changed your choice?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. The answer sat heavy on his tongue. Would it have? His people were dying. The sickness had spread beyond containment, and no known cure existed. The vial had been the only hope. Even if he had known the full extent of what he was accepting, could he have truly walked away? She seemed to read his thoughts. "The cure is real," she said. "It will heal them. But you are no longer separate from us." He swallowed hard. "So, what am I now?" She reached out, her fingertips grazing his arm, and suddenly, the hum inside him grew louder. Not noise, but something deeper, an awareness expanding through him. "You are the bridge," she said. Images flashed through his mind. His colony, his people, but also something more. A connection stretching beyond time, beyond species. A choice not just for himself, but for an entire future that had yet to unfold. He had freed her, and in doing so, he had freed something greater. The air around him shimmered, and the city beyond seemed to pulse, waiting. His heart pounded as realization settled in. There was no going back. And yet, deep inside, something told him he had never been more alive. Elias felt his breath hitch as the gravity of his decision settled over him like a second skin. He had made his choice, But the consequences were unraveling faster than he could grasp. His body hummed with an energy he didn't understand, an unfamiliar presence woven into his very being. He was changing, and there was no stopping it. The woman, if she was even that anymore, watched him with something like patience, though her expression carried an edge of something deeper. Anticipation? Sadness? He couldn't tell. What happens now? His voice came out steadier than he felt. She turned slightly, gesturing toward the impossible city in the distance. Now, you walk forward. He wanted to argue. He wanted to demand answers. But the hum in his bones urged him onward, as if something unseen was guiding his steps. His body moved almost on instinct, and before he knew it, he was following her. The closer they got, the more the city unfolded before him. It was like nothing he had ever seen. Vast, yet weightless, as though it existed in multiple dimensions at once. Towers of shifting light stretched toward a sky that wasn't quite a sky, and pathways seemed to form beneath his feet just as he needed them. The beings who inhabited the place moved like whispers, their forms flickering between physical and something else entirely. One of them approached, taller than Elias, with a body that rippled between solid and translucent. The being regarded him with deep, luminous eyes. No mouth, no visible features beyond its gaze. Yet when it spoke, the words landed in his mind without sound. He carries the bridge within him. The woman beside him nodded. He chose. Another figure appeared, then another. More of them, surrounding him, studying him, not with hostility, but with curiosity. A deep knowing. Elias's skin burned with the energy coursing through him. It wasn't pain, not exactly, but an intensity he couldn't shake. He clenched his fists, trying to ground himself. "What does that mean?" he asked, voice rough. "The bridge?" The first being tilted its head, considering him. "You are now part of the cycle. You are neither fully them nor fully us. You are the threshold." Elias felt a sharp pulse in his chest, like a second heartbeat waking up inside him. His mind flooded with memories that weren't his own, visions of civilizations rising and falling, of ancient agreements forged in places beyond time. He saw humans long ago, standing where he stood now. His breath caught. "I'm not the first." The woman, his guide, his captor, whatever she was, nodded. "No." The weight of it hit him like a collapsing star. He wasn't just a man who had stumbled onto an alien world. He was part of something far older, something vast and inescapable. The gift, he murmured. The cure. It was never just medicine, was it? The being who had spoken to him took a step closer, its gaze steady. "It is life. It is connection. It is the thread that binds." Elias exhaled sharply. His people would be healed. The sickness would vanish. But the price was far greater than he had realized. The cure wasn't just a remedy, it was an invitation, a thread weaving humanity into something beyond itself. Will they change? His voice was barely above a whisper. The woman touched his arm, and the warmth of her presence flooded through him. "They already are," she said. A deep silence followed. He knew then, without needing any more words, that his people would never be the same. This was the first step towards something inevitable, something that had always been waiting. His choice had set it into motion. The city pulsed, the air shimmering around them. He could feel the bridge inside him now, stretching out, reaching beyond the stars. There was no going back, and somehow, he wasn't sure he wanted to. Elias stood at the precipice of something greater than himself. The weight of his choice settled deep in his chest, but there was no fear anymore, only understanding. He had stepped into the unknown, into a path that countless before him had taken, yet none had ever returned the same. The beings around him moved with an eerie grace, their luminous forms flickering like candlelight caught in an unseen breeze. They did not speak, yet he could feel their voices in his mind, whispers of history, of destinies entwined, of a future stretching farther than he could comprehend. The woman, the one he had freed, stood beside him, her violet eyes watching him with a quiet knowing. She was no longer just the prisoner he had saved. She was something far older, something powerful, and she had been waiting. He turned to her. "What happens to me now?" "You walk forward," she said again. But this time, there was more to her voice. A sadness, a reverence. Elias clenched his jaw. And my people? They will be healed, she said. But they will never be the same. The cure is not just for the body. It is for the soul. It will awaken them. A cold shiver ran down his spine. Awaken them to what? She placed a hand on his chest, right above his heart, and in that moment, he saw flashes of light, of planets bathed in gold, of civilizations rising not through war and conquest but through connection, through something deeper than survival, deeper than power. He saw his people, not as they were now, but as they could be. Their bodies would heal, but their minds, their essence, would shift. They would hear the same hum that now pulsed in his bones. They would feel the pull towards something greater. They would be given the same choice he had faced. His breath caught. You mean, this isn't the end? The woman smiled, and for the first time, it was truly gentle. It is only the beginning. Elias turned to the city, to the vastness of it, the impossible beauty. He could feel the bridge inside him now, stretching outward, connecting him not just to this place but to something beyond the stars, beyond time. He could return to his people, bring them the cure, watch as they took their first steps towards something far greater than themselves. Or he could stay. The beings around him seemed to sense his thoughts, their glowing eyes watching, waiting. There was no pressure, no command, only patience. The choice had always been his. He exhaled slowly. The truth was, he already knew the answer. He turned back to the woman. Show me, he said. A soft, knowing nod. The city pulsed. The stars shifted. And Elias Vance stepped forward, into the unknown, never looking back.